Good morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, for the future. In his first major speech to Congress, President Biden lays out an ambitious expansion of government services.
In my view, we also need to make a once-in-a-generation investment in our families and our children.
We'll tell you what's in his nearly $2 trillion American Families Plan and get Republican reaction. Gathering intel, federal investigators executing a search warrant at the Manhattan apartment of Rudy Giuliani, what they were looking for, and what the former New York City mayor is saying now. Developing overnight, shelf life boost. Moderna now says their coronavirus vaccine can last for 3 months while stored at refrigerated temperatures. How the drug maker's latest finding could benefit the country's more rural and underserved areas as concern over reaching a vaccine plateau grows. And liftoff. NASA's mini helicopter, the Ingenuity, is making history, flying above the surface of Mars. The lead engineer on the mission is also making history of her own, her vision of the future of space exploration, and why she won't call the Ingenuity a drone. That was something we kept laughing about. Why do we call it a mini helicopter? She's got a really good reason for it.
Well, we fully support her decision to call it a mini helicopter.
Exactly. So, it makes a lot of sense.
Looking forward to that conversation. We'll get to that in a little bit. We do want to begin with President Biden's first address to a joint session of Congress.
On the eve of his 100th day in office, President Biden touted his accomplishments and looked to gain support for his multi-trillion-dollar economic plans.
100 days since I took the oath of office and lifted my hand off our family Bible and inherited a nation we all did that was in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Now, after just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again. But tonight, I can say, because of you, the American people, our progress these past 100 days against one of the worst pandemics in history has been one of the greatest logistical achievements this country's ever seen.
We have full coverage and analysis for you this morning. Leanne Caldwell, who covers Capitol Hill. Monica Alba, who covers the White House. And in a moment, former Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo.
Leanne, let's start with you. So during the speech, President Biden outlined a number of legislative priorities, which really puts a lot of what he said in the hands of Congress. So what were the biggest takeaways?
That's right, Savannah. It's now Congress's job to implement what President Biden laid out, which was a massive restructuring of the American economy, really an investment that we haven't seen in generations. Central to that is his American Families Plan, which focuses on paid family leave, early child care, early education. And let's take a listen to how he outlined the importance of investing in education.
When this nation made 12 years of public education universal in the last century, it made us the best educated, best prepared nation in the world. The world's caught up or catching up. They're not waiting. As a community college professor who teaches today as First Lady, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Joe, any country that out-educates us is going to outcompete us. She'll be deeply involved in leading this effort.
He focused a lot on these components, his two infrastructure plans put together, the actual jobs plan and then the human infrastructure plan, totals $4 trillion, Savannah. So that's going to be a heavy lift to pass Congress.
Absolutely. Monica, at times President Biden seemed to be speaking to Republicans outside of the chamber, outside of Washington, making more of a populist appeal to Americans who didn't support him, especially blue-collar workers. What more can you tell us about that message?
Exactly, Joe. There was so much in the president's speech that was aimed at lawmakers, urging them to get legislative priorities across the finish line. But you're right. A lot of the speech was also aimed at people who maybe didn't vote for him in November. Of course, this was a major theme of his inaugural address, trying to reach out to those, saying he was going to work just as hard for the people who cast a ballot for him as those who did not. So he spoke using a word that's something we actually heard a lot from former President Trump, talking specifically to the forgotten people and those who may be looking at some of his proposals and wondering whether they will apply to him. He made a pitch and case for why they do. Listen to his rationale here.
I know some of you at home are wondering whether these jobs are for you. So many of you, so many of the folks I grew up with, feel left behind, forgotten, in an economy that's so rapidly changing. It's frightening. I want to speak directly to you. 90% of the infrastructure jobs created in the American Jobs Plan do not require a college degree. 75% don't require an associate's degree. The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America. That's what it is.
So this is also a preview of how you can expect the president, the vice president, and the other top officials who are going to be traveling in the coming weeks to try to sell their bills, but not just the American Jobs Plan, but also the American Families Plan. They believe because both of these are quite popular and do enjoy bipartisan support outside of Washington, D.C., that's how they're going to be able to cast it. And I thought it was interesting. Of course, we can get to the adlibs later, but there were some moments where the president seemed to say, I do want bipartisan work here, and I do believe we can make it possible. Language like the one you just heard there is kind of an example of how we think he's going to be able to make that overture to GOP lawmakers as well, Savannah and Joe.
Yeah, and Monica, we want to get to those ad-libs in just a moment. But first, Leanne, tell us now about the official rebuttal from the Republicans. It was delivered by Senator Tim Scott. What was his message to Americans?
Yeah, well, while President Biden asked Republicans to work with him, it is a big ask. This is something $4 trillion paying for it by raising taxes on corporations and the wealthy is not something that Republicans are immediately going to sign on to, if ever. Republicans say that President Biden has campaigned on unifying the country, and his message and his policies now are doing the opposite, they say. And that was Senator Tim Scott's message. Let's take a listen.
But our nation is starving for more than empty platitudes. We need policies and progress that brings us closer together. But 3 months in, the actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further apart. I won't waste your time with finger pointing or partisan bickering. You can get that on TV anytime you want. I want to have an honest conversation about common sense and common ground.
So while there are deep policy disagreements between Republicans and Democrats, President Biden is following through on those bipartisan calls to come together. He is holding a meeting at the White House in the next week with the 4 leaders of Congress. Savannah, Joe.
And Monica, let's talk about those ad libs. You know, when the president is speaking, journalists are looking at the scripted speech. So then we see when he's going off script. That happened a few times, didn't it? Tell us about that.
It was actually quite frequent, Joe. It almost surprised us because for something like this, a joint address to Congress, the president has been working on this speech for weeks. He'd been practicing it for days. He had even been trying to memorize portions of it, we were told, so that he would adhere to it. But he really found himself on at least 5 or 6 occasions veering from what was prepared for delivery. There was something where he acknowledged the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, by name, saying, Mitch, I really appreciated, for instance, when he was talking about his late son, Beau, and a cancer project. He also then, even when talking about gun safety and trying to get some reform passed, said, I don't think you need deer seeing them wearing Kevlar vests, for instance. So there were several of those that were made as asides, and it was even that final line that I thought was interesting, since that speech was more than an hour long. At the very end, he said to everybody assembled there, of course, fewer lawmakers and attendees than normal, thank you for your patience, not something you would normally hear a president deliver in these kinds of speeches, Savannah.
Yeah, definitely not. Leanne, really quickly before we let you both go, if I could just ask you, we know with that COVID relief bill that cost also about $2 trillion that no Republican in the House or Senate got on board with that, and they were able to pass it with this process called budget reconciliation. Could we see that happen again for these two plans that are really expensive?
We absolutely could, and that's something that Democrats have not taken off the table. Republicans are saying that they would like to work in a bipartisan way on at least the transportation traditional infrastructure component of it. But reconciliation is very much a possibility, Savannah, Joe.
All right, Leanne and Monica, thanks so much.
During his hour-long speech, President Biden laid out some big plans with some big price tags. But with Democrats holding a razor-thin majority in Congress, how much can he actually accomplish?
Former Republican Congressman and NBC News political analyst Carlos Curbelo joins us now. Carlos, good morning. Thank you so much for being here with us. Now, I actually want to pick up where we just were with Leanne and with what Joe just said. So President Biden referenced FDR several times during his candidacy, suggesting that this is a similar moment in American history to the Great Depression. But as we were just mentioning, he's dealing with very different margins in Congress than FDR had when he passed the New Deal. How does that impact his legislative path as he moves forward when we look at things like reconciliation being how we're getting things done?
Well, that's right, Savannah. Under the Great Depression, there was a sense of national unity in the Congress. Republicans and Democrats were working together. Much different, and that's why you hear Joe Biden taking the message directly to the American people, talking about how some of his policies may not enjoy bipartisan support in Congress, yet they do have the support of Democrats, independents, and at least some Republicans when you look at the polling. So he's trying to unite the country. He's almost trying to create a self-fulfilling prophecy by talking about FDR, by talking about the way the nation acted under the Great Depression and trying to create that environment in the country. It certainly doesn't exist today, and that's why it's so hard for him to get his some of these policies passed.
Carlos, the overarching issue here is big government. Over the past year, we've seen the government play a huge role in tackling the pandemic, including most recently with vaccine distribution. So could Americans be more open to a big government approach, or might they think the pandemic was a special circumstance and they're not hungry for any more of that?
Joe, without question, over the last year, Americans have become more comfortable with government growing its role in our country. And by the way, former President Trump was a part of that. He's the one who oftentimes would tell Congress to go big, to not worry about the price tag. So he had an impact on the Republican Party that has kind of broken that Republican orthodoxy to automatically oppose any big government spending programs. That's something that's certainly a tailwind for President Biden and Democrats as they try to move an ambitious agenda. The country is no longer reflexively opposed to these ideas.
All right. Carlos, thank you so much for your perspective this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
FBI agents searched the home and office of Rudy Giuliani on Wednesday as part of a criminal investigation into his alleged dealings with Ukrainian officials. Sources familiar with the search tell NBC News that agents seized some of Giuliani's electronic devices. The search warrants were obtained by federal prosecutors from the Southern District of New York. That's the same office Giuliani once ran earlier in his career. The former New York City mayor was also notably former President Trump's personal attorney. NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delaney joins us now to walk us through the latest on this case. So, Ken, first of all, what is at the heart of this investigation, and what have Giuliani and his lawyers had to say about these search warrants?
Good morning, Joe. Well, what appears to be at the heart of this criminal investigation is the rather pedestrian question of whether Rudy Giuliani complied with lobbying laws, whether he should have registered as a foreign agent when he was dealing with those Ukrainians trying to dig up dirt on Joe Biden, and also advocating for changes in American policy. For example, he was trying to get the ambassador to Ukraine fired, and he was essentially trying to influence the election by trying to discredit Joe Biden, and he may have been paid by Ukrainian sources, and if that's the case, he should have registered as a foreign agent, is what experts are saying. But it's really much bigger than that, Joe, because really, at this point, the U.S. intelligence community has said that this is a Russian disinformation campaign to try to interfere in our election. And Rudy Giuliani was in the middle of it. He was receiving bogus information from Russian agents to try to discredit Joe Biden, and he was participating in that. And what the White House was even warned of that in the fall by the U.S. intelligence community. As to what Giuliani and his lawyers are saying, predictably, they're saying that this is a bogus act by the government. They're saying that his lawyer called it legal thuggery. They're saying that they could have just asked for the documents. But when the FBI and the Justice Department gets a search warrant, they convince a judge that that was the only way they could have gotten that information, Joe.
Yeah, Ken, let's talk about this search warrant. I understand it's a high bar to get this kind of search warrant. What would prosecutors have needed to show a judge to convince them that they have a case to move forward with this?
That's a great question. They would have to convince a judge that there is probable cause to believe a crime has been committed and that the evidence of that crime, some of the evidence, was present at Giuliani's home and office where they conducted these searches and on his electronic devices, which they have seized. And that is a high bar, and it's particularly high in this case because Rudy Giuliani is an attorney, and so there's a lot of complication because there may be information that they seize that's protected by attorney-client privilege. They're going to have a so-called clean team look at the information and weed out that stuff. So they don't take this lightly, and this got approval at the highest levels of the Justice Department, Joe, but it also shows that this is a major escalation in that investigation.
And Ken, a source familiar with the investigation told NBC News federal prosecutors had enough information to get this search warrant last year. So why is it all happening now?
That's right. And they met resistance at the highest levels of the Trump Justice Department. And one possible reason for that is that some people felt it was too close to the fall election. The Justice Department does not like to take action that could potentially impact the election if it was made public. Other people, though, are a little bit skeptical of the notion that top Trump officials were resisting this search warrant against the lawyer of the then president. We'll have to see how that all fleshes out. But the bottom line is they've now executed the warrant and the investigation is moving forward, Joe.
We'll see what happens. Ken Delanian, thank you so much. 3 men in Georgia have now been charged with federal hate crimes in the death of Ahmaud Arbery. The men were already facing state charges. The Department of Justice says the men chased and then shot the 25-year-old last year after seeing him running through their neighborhood. The killing and the police handling of the case led to protests. On Wednesday, Gregory McMichael, his son Travis, and William Bryan were indicted by a federal grand jury charged with interfering with Arbery's right to use a public street because of his race. They've also been charged with 1 count of attempted kidnapping, and the McMichaels were charged with using, carrying, and brandishing a firearm during a violent crime.
One of the 12 jurors who convicted Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd has spoken of the, quote, agony he faced during the trial. Here's NBC's Gabe Gutierrez.
Savannah and Joe, good morning. Previously, we had heard from an alternate juror who was not inside the room as the jury was deliberating Derek Chauvin's fate. Now, for the first time, we are hearing from one juror inside that room who is now breaking his silence.
I knew it was a historic moment.
Brandon Mitchell was one of the 12 jurors who convicted Derek Chauvin of George Floyd's murder.
It was tough. There was days where I just didn't want to go. So watch somebody in agony and watch somebody die over and over again on instant replay, basically.
He says the initial ballot for second-degree manslaughter was 11-1, but that lone juror came around within an hour.
They were just being extra careful and extra delicate.
The longest discussion was about third-degree murder, he says, because of confusing jury instructions. Second-degree murder was unanimous on the first ballot. The key testimony for him, Dr. Martin Tobin, the world-renowned pulmonologist, and eyewitness Donald Williams, the MMA fighter.
I thought the prosecution was almost doing too much. I felt like it was a for sure no-brainer.
As for the defense's argument that an angry crowd of bystanders distracted officers,
I thought that was absolutely ridiculous. I thought that was crazy. I was like, if that's the route you're going to go, that doesn't even make any sense.
Mitchell would not say what he thought an appropriate punishment for Chauvin would be. His sentencing is now scheduled for late June. Savannah and Joe.
And let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather.
Bill Cairns is here. And Bill, you weren't lying. Yesterday was beautiful, but I'm hearing today's not going to be so great.
Yeah, some areas that's all one day of summer have to appreciate it because that was about it. Now the winds of change are going to blow in. Just wait till tomorrow in the Northeast. But let's talk about the areas of greatest concern right now. Worst weather by far in the country has been in areas of Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. Some of the pictures yesterday of Benton County, Arkansas, which is in the northwest corner of the state. They had significant rainfall. They had rescues that had to take place. They had to get people out of their vehicles that were stranded. You can see that car right there. We did not hear any reports of any injuries or any fatalities, but the first responders had their hands full. At one point, even a bus got stuck in the high water. You can see it there. The Imagination Station bus, kind of one of those buses they've repurposed for kids, for like preschools that they drive around. So let's get to the forecast. We still have 12 million people that are under flash flood watches. The number of flash flood warnings where we have high water right now is in the maroon color. So still a couple areas, one of them near Hot Springs. If you look at the radar, there's just a ton of rain this morning from the Ohio Valley all through Memphis, Little Rock. We've had huge hailstorms last night around San Antonio. We had 4-inch hail reported, smashed windows, smashed car windows, dented cars. They said it could possibly end up being $1 billion weather disaster because of that hail damage. So the rain forecast from the northeast all the way to the south as we go throughout the next 2 days. And as far as severe weather goes, the areas in yellow, 39 million people today could deal with severe storms possibly from Birmingham to Nashville, Pittsburgh, all the way to New York. So yeah, a very active weather day. That's what happens when we get, these big, huge warm-ups early, and then the cold air tries to move back in behind it.
Oof. All right. Well, Bill, thank you so much. See you next hour.
Okay.
Coming up, promising new data from Moderna on their coronavirus vaccine.
How a reported longer shelf life could help some of the country's underserved communities. Up next.
Turning now to the police shooting death of Andrew Brown Jr. A judge in North Carolina has ruled that body cam and dash cam videos of the shooting should not be released to the public for now, but his family will be allowed to view the video privately. NBC News correspondent Carrie Sanders joins us from Elizabeth City, North Carolina, with more on the ruling. Carrie, good morning.
Well, good morning, Joe. Andrew Brown was shot 5 times. The shot that took his life, according to the medical examiner, was a bullet to the back of the head. Early evidence suggests he was driving away when he was shot. Why deputies fired may be best explained by looking at the body camera footage. But as you just noted, the judges decided for the moment those videos will not be seen by the public.
Say his name! Andrew Brown!
Protests overnight again in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Police moving in to disperse crowds, arresting demonstrators for violating a citywide curfew. As the judge has now ruled,
the court orders as follows.
The Pasquotank Sheriff's 4 body cams and 1 dash cam recorded when officers shot and killed 42-year-old Andrew Brown will not be released publicly for at least 30 days.
Confidentiality is necessary to protect either an active internal criminal investigation or a potential internal criminal investigation.
Andrew Brown's family will be allowed to watch the videos sooner. His 92-year-old grandmother.
Would you like to see that video?
Yes, I would.
Would you like the public to see that video?
Yes, I would.
Why?
Then everybody know what happened.
The DA says releasing the videos now could taint a potential jury if the officers end up facing charges.
You cannot swing a skunk in front of a group of people and then ask them not to smell it.
The DA says the body cams show Brown's car moving towards the officers.
The next movement of the car is forward. It is in the direction of law enforcement and makes contact with law enforcement. It is then and only then that you hear shots.
Brown family attorney Wayne Kendall.
There was contact between the vehicle and the officers.
Which suggests that they may say that the car was a deadly weapon?
Which suggests that there's a possibility, yes.
The deputies who were serving the search warrant remain unnamed, but they did have a lawyer representing them here in court. That lawyer saying the deputies are also distraught, but that they believe the shooting was justified. Joe?
All right. Carrie, thanks so much. The coronavirus vaccine rollout could be getting a major boost in the next few weeks. Overnight, Moderna announced its 2-dose vaccine can be refrigerated for 3 months instead of just 30 days. The only other vaccine that can be stored for that long is Johnson & Johnson's. NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez is with us this morning. Hi, Isa. So now this could be beneficial for rural and underserved areas because of that increased shelf life, but also because it could give these communities an additional option, whereas J&J was really the primary option that they were able to get out to those areas. But that shot has some hesitancy issues now, even though the FDA does say it's safe and effective. So what's Moderna saying, and when could we see these shots being put into refrigerators?
Good morning, Savannah. So right now, the FDA has already approved for the Moderna vaccine to be stored at these refrigerated temperatures for 30 days. Now, when we talk about refrigerated temperatures, we're not talking about those sub-zero temperatures at which the vaccine can be stored for much longer. We're talking about regular refrigerators, right? 36 to 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this new Moderna study shows that at these temperatures, the shelf life for their vaccine, like you said, can be up to 3 months. Of course, we would not see this right away, right? The FDA first would have to approve this. Moderna has to submit their findings for their approval, but the company says that if approved, this could really facilitate the distribution of their vaccine to more doctors' offices, other smaller locations. And this is really welcome news right now, as we've seen a decline in daily vaccinations in the U.S. Right now, we're seeing about 2.5 million shots being administered across the country every day. That's down from the high of over 4 million shots a day that we saw earlier this month. Savannah?
And now both Moderna and Pfizer's vaccines have been out since December, and now we're actually getting a better idea of its impact on hospitalization. So what are doctors seeing?
Yeah, so Savannah, this week the CDC published a real-world study that showed that the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are 94% effective at preventing hospitalization for people 65 and older. They also found in this study that these vaccines are 64% effective at preventing hospitalizations in the elderly who've received just one shot. So the CDC for this study looked at 417 hospitalized adults across 14 states from January to March. And they said that these findings are consistent with what they found in clinical studies as well. Keep in mind, this week, we know that U.S. adults 65 and older, 81% of them have received at least one dose of a coronavirus vaccine. Savannah?
That is great news. That's a really big number. That's good to hear. Now, Isa, let's turn to India. We've been reporting on how the COVID situation there is just reaching such bad levels. Are they getting the help they need?
That's right, Savannah. So, they're still seeing a COVID-19 surge in India. This week, the country surpassed the death toll of 200,000 deaths due to COVID-19. They're also experiencing, nationwide oxygen shortages. Their vaccine rollout is slow. As far as the help that they need, the White House yesterday evening in a statement said that they will be sending in government flights with aid to the country. The aid will include oxygen support, which includes an initial delivery of 1,100 refillable oxygen cylinders, PPE, including 15 million N95 masks, also vaccine manufacturing supplies, rapid diagnostic tests, therapeutics, public health assistance. And again, this is something that, is going to be really important right now in India. On Thursday, they saw the record of new COVID-19 cases in a single day, with over 380,000 new reported cases that day. Savannah?
Some really scary numbers there. Isa, thank you so much for all the latest on COVID headlines.
Joining us now is Dr. Mario Ramirez. He's an emergency physician and the former pandemic and emerging threats coordinator under President Obama. So, Dr. Ramirez, let's start there with India. That country sent assistance to the U.S. during the early stages of the pandemic. Now, America is returning the favor. Just explain to us, how critical is it to the world to bring the virus under control in India, a country with a 1.3 billion population?
Well, it's really important, Joe, and I think it highlights, the split that we're seeing in the world right now. The news here in the United States is that things are continuing to get better. But I think sometimes here in America, we're not aware that the situation is still worsening considerably. around the world. And a lot of people have highlighted the risk that this much disease circulating in other parts of the world creates when we talk about, the potential for variants and some of those other things. But just the scale of human suffering in India right now is just vast and extremely difficult to comprehend. And, I think the U.S. is doing a good thing by supporting India, but it's going to take a long time for us to turn the tide in that country. India has about 940 million sort of adults that are eligible for vaccine, but only the capacity to produce about 70 million doses a month. And so it's going to take a long time for us to turn the tide in that country. And while that's going on, there's significant risk to other countries in the region and certainly to the rest of the world.
Here in the U.S., more than half of the states are now reporting a decline in cases. This is happening as many states are relaxing restrictions, and with the CDC just a couple days ago relaxing the mask guidance outdoors. Is that a sign that we are past the worst part of the virus here? How worried should we still be about the variants?
Well, so it should give us increased confidence that we are on the right path, Joe. And all of the indicators, are giving us better confidence that the vaccines are working as they should. The CDC has released data showing that, the vaccines continue to be highly effective out there in the wild, and we're seeing the number of cases and the number of hospitalizations and even the test positivity fraction, coming down. And those are all good signs. But the other number that's coming down that we really need to worry about are, first, like Issa reported, the number of decreasing average vaccinations per day. And we're not quite at that point yet where we have enough of our population vaccinated to feel like we're completely out of the woods. But the other number that's coming down that we really need to, sort of try to reverse is the amount of testing that's going on. As we start to reopen the world, and particularly as we start to reopen workplaces and other things like that, surveillance testing is going to be really critical. And as we start to push people back into their normal lives, we've got to keep a close handle on what's going out there so that we don't miss a potential surge in the future.
So many important points. Dr. Ramirez, as always, thank you so much.
Good to see you, Jeff.
Let's now take a look at what's making news around the world this morning.
NBC News correspondent Claudio Lavanga joins us from Rome. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Well, a man carried out a knife attack in a kindergarten in southern China, killing 2 children and wounding 16 other people. Now the suspect has been arrested and there is an ongoing investigation. But this is only the latest of a series of similar attacks in schools across China in recent years. And in Germany, an anti-lockdown movement has come under the eye, under the scrutiny of Germany's domestic intelligence agency. They are focusing mainly on some of the members of the so-called lateral thinkers. This is the name of the movement, as they believe they have links with far-right and other extremist groups, and they are infiltrating anti-lockdown peaceful process just to create tensions with the police. And in Canada, the construction of a controversial oil pipeline has been halted after a hummingbird's nest was found on a tree that was cut down during construction works. Now, the hummingbird is not an endangered species, but it is protected by federal law in British Columbia. Environmentalists have been trying to stop or halt the construction of the pipeline for years now, unsuccessfully. Well, the hummingbird has succeeded where they failed on a wing and a prayer. Guys?
Tiny but mighty.
Seriously.
Exactly.
Claudio, thank you so much. Coming up, Biden's immigration plan.
How migrants and asylum seekers are reacting to the politics of the border security. Next. All right, here's a talker. A man was arrested at JFK Airport after authorities found 35 live songbirds hidden in his clothing. Federal investigators say the man flew from his home country of Guyana to New York with the birds hidden in hair curlers that were attached to his jacket. He told officials he had been offered $3,000 to deliver the birds to the United States. Why? Well, investigators think the birds would have been entered in singing contests. That's where cage birds are pitted in competition against one another to sing longest and fastest. The contests are apparently held in parks in Brooklyn and Queens and attract big money bets. Prosecutors say the best singers can sell for up to $10,000 each. The man's lawyer declined to comment. Extraordinary story, and not the first time this has happened. Similar arrests have been made at the airport.
That was a whole lot of stuff that I knew nothing about.
I know.
So thank you for enlightening us about these bird song contest.
Good to know.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. What a story. A talker, you were right.
Let's end our exhausting war over immigration. For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it. It's time to fix it.
That was President Biden last night urging Congress to take action on immigration reform. NBC's Jacob Soboroff takes a closer look at the president's plan and what it could mean for the country's 11 million undocumented residents.
Good morning, you guys. Last night we heard the president of the United States say, let's end our exhausting war on immigration. And he pushed his comprehensive immigration reform proposal, the one that would give legal status, a pathway to citizenship to 11 million undocumented people living in the United States of America. But he also signaled a willingness to compromise. And that willingness to compromise worries a lot of what is known as mixed status families, with some family members being undocumented and others being U.S. citizens. What is at risk is another form of family separation, as one of those families told me directly. Anna's parents, like most of the 11 million undocumented U.S. residents, entered the country by evading detection. Now most people who arrive at the border attempt to enter differently. They actually want to turn themselves in so they can declare asylum. But often the forces driving them are the same: economic ruin. For years, hunger and poverty caused by climate extremes has been intensifying, driving Central Americans to the U.S. In 2019, the World Food Program took us to a village in remote Guatemala where they were feeding school kids whose parents could no longer grow their cash crops nor buy supplementary nutrition. So every one of these kids that's raising their hand right now knows somebody who's left to go to the United States because they couldn't survive here. Who do you know that went to the United States?
Mi papá.
Papa. What's he doing there now? Cleaning. He's cleaning. So her dad's in the U.S. cleaning. Do you want to go there or do you want to stay here?
¿Te quisieras ir con él o mejor aquí, con tu mamá?
Aquí. She wants to stay. Now, the World Food Program says conditions are worsening. This was a watermelon. Complicating President Biden's immigration agenda. And now you think the current controversy might distract from helping people who have lived here for years, if not decades, just like you.
Yeah, it might affect. I think. Yeah.
It's been really great to get to know Anna and her family. Of course, there'll be more of that on our very special report for Meet the Press Reports. That'll be streaming tonight right here on NBC News Now. I have to say, what they are up against, that other form of family separation, a potential separation by ICE if her mother or father are apprehended and deported, is something that many undocumented families in this country deal with on a daily basis. It's a very different situation from the family separations at the border under the Trump administration. But nevertheless, it's something that I think terrorizes, and that's a fair word to use, so many undocumented families in this country. If President Biden doesn't move forward to push that comprehensive immigration reform proposal, and he signaled he would in the address last night, that's going to have a lot of families sitting on the edge of their seats, just like Anna's. Joe, Savannah.
All right, Jacob, thanks so much. And as he just mentioned, you can watch that full report on Meet the Press Reports tonight at 8 p.m. on NBC News Now and streaming on Peacock On Demand starting Friday.
President Biden will swing through Georgia today to mark his 100th day in office. He'll start by visiting former President Jimmy Carter and First Lady Rosalind. It's a key state, one that President Biden and two newly elected Democratic senators flipped from red to blue, giving Democrats control of both the White House and Congress. In response to those wins, the Georgia state legislature passed a sweeping voting rights law, claiming the changes will make elections more secure. It puts limits on absentee voting and gives more flexibility to counties to choose when polls open and close. But voting rights activists worry the changes could lead to voter suppression. Some have called for boycotts of high-profile Georgia-based companies. And already Major League Baseball has pulled this year's All-Star game from the state. Those moves are starting to affect workers there. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson joins us from Atlanta. So, Priscilla, is the state already seeing any layoffs because of boycotts? What could be the impact?
Well, not quite, Joe. What we are seeing is that Major League Baseball pulled their All-Star game out of the state that was expected to be held this summer. We also know that Will Smith pulled his latest film out of the state. So production on that film is not going to be happening here. And while those moves didn't necessarily lead to layoffs, it does mean that new jobs that were going to be created in Georgia are now not going to be here. And that's still a big deal because there are tons of hospitality workers and other folks who were laid off as a result of this pandemic and are still not back at work and could have benefited from some of those opportunities. I had an opportunity to speak to one of those folks, Tim Hove, about all of this and what a larger boycott could mean in the state of Georgia. Take a listen to what she shared with me.
We get our work from businesses coming to Georgia. The events that come, that's when we work. So, of course, if events boycott and decide not to come here, we don't get to work. And we're ready to go back to work. We need to work. Boycotting is not what's going to get us to where we need to get to. We understand we need to get out and vote. We need to get those people in power who are going to help the working people.
So Timby is out knocking doors, talking to folks about that restrictive voting law and encouraging them to do just that, vote. Joe?
Priscilla, folks you're talking to, do they think Georgia could be a harbinger for other states looking to pass similar election laws?
That's right. That's exactly what a number of folks I spoke to have mentioned, because while Georgia was the first state to pass these new, more restrictive voting laws since the election, it is not the only state looking at things like this. We're seeing similar measures in state legislatures in places like Texas, Ohio, and Arizona, among other places. And I was speaking with one business owner here, and she actually brought that up. Take a listen to what she said.
Everyone's eyes is on Georgia because the other states ought to follow. We got Florida. I think we have another couple of some other Midwestern states. Texas is one of them as well that is looking to do the same thing, or if they've not already done it.
And so it's kind of like Georgia maybe needs to be the example.
We definitely need to be the example.
And I pressed her on whether making an example out of Georgia is worth it if that means that her bottom line takes a hit. And she told me that she's on the fence about that. Joe?
And Priscilla, as we mentioned, the president is visiting Georgia today. What is on his agenda?
Right. He is commemorating his 100th day in office by coming to the state that sent a Democrat to the White House for the first time in nearly 2 decades when the state elected Joe Biden. And so he's going to start his trip here in Plains, Georgia, visiting fellow Democrat and former President Jimmy Carter. He is then going to be going to Gwinnett County, one of those diversifying counties in the suburbs of Atlanta that helped Joe Biden to secure that win. He's going to be hosting a drive-in car rally there, talking about his achievements in the past 100 days, likely to mention, of course, that $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, among other things. Joe, Savannah?
Georgia, clearly very much a battleground state right now. Priscilla Thompson, thanks so much.
A lot of families faced impossible childcare choices this past year as they juggled work from home and their kids learning from home. Last night, President Biden addressed some of those issues, saying he plans to expand access to childcare. NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Ruhl has more.
Hey there, Joe and Savannah. President Biden's speech focused on his first 100 days and his accomplishments, but it was also a look forward at his Build Back Better plan with 2 key areas: the American Jobs Plan, which is focused on infrastructure, and American Family Plan with a big push for childcare.
Hold on to it.
At the height of the pandemic and with her children out of school, Latasha Kendrick had to make a difficult decision: stay home with her 3 kids or keep her job.
I'm going to quit if I have to.
8 months later, the single mom is still without a job.
I want to go back to work, and I just need childcare. Like, if I can have that, then I'll be okay.
Is it a vicious cycle? No childcare, no job, no job, no childcare?
Yes, it really is.
It's not just parents struggling. Childcare centers are being hit hard, too. Last year, many parents pulled kids out because of fears over the virus. Facilities also had to limit the number of children to account for social distancing. All of that led to layoffs and shutdowns. Now, 1 in 6 childcare workers are out of a job. Is your business making a lot less money than it was a year ago?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
It's 50% less.
Cecilia Montero has been running a child care center for nearly 40 years.
We suffer a lot.
Do you think it will come back?
I don't know.
How come?
Because still a lot of people don't have a job.
President Biden is proposing $225 billion to invest in child care centers, increase wages for workers to a minimum of $15 an hour, and make child care affordable for low and middle income families. This on top of the $39 billion already targeted to shore up the industry. Some relief in a year where everyone has paid a price. Do you think our children feel it?
Of course. They feel it just like we feel it.
President Biden is focused on early childhood education to get kids on the right track, but also child care centers to help parents, specifically moms, get back into the workforce. Both help long-term the economy, and we know even before the pandemic, we did not have ample child care centers across this country. The Biden administration is looking to take that on. Joe, Savannah?
Coming up, 3 successful flights on another world and 1 historic Wright brothers moment for NASA's Ingenuity mini helicopter.
We'll bring you my conversation with the groundbreaking project's lead engineer, Mimi Ong, next. It's time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
CNBC senior markets correspondent Dominic Chu is with us again. Dom, good morning.
Good morning to you, Joe. Good morning, Savannah. Well, Amazon is raising pay for hundreds of thousands of hourly workers. The company says more than 500,000 employees will see an increase of 50 cents to $3 an hour. The move comes as Amazon is preparing for a federal hearing over challenges to its victory in a union election at an Alabama warehouse earlier this month. Watch shares of Apple today. Profits there at the company more than doubled in its most recent quarter. That's on continued strong demand for the iPhone as people upgrade to 5G wireless technology and bought new iPads and Mac computers for working and learning at home during the virus pandemic. iPhone sales rising 66%. Apple does say, though, the global shortage of computer chips could hit sales this quarter, primarily affecting the Mac and the iPad. And General Motors has a plan to simplify the charging experience for electric vehicles. It's working with 7 charging networks to give drivers access to nearly 60,000 plugs across the U.S. and Canada. Mobile apps for GM vehicles will include real-time information for those stations. Owners will also be able to start and pay for charging through that app as well. So another big step there in that EV evolution. I'm not sure about you guys, but I still drive an internal combustion vehicle. I just like having gas stations around.
That is one of the big issues, is that people say there's not enough charging stations, but our new Secretary of Transportation plans to change that, so we'll see.
Right.
We don't have cars. Well, I don't. You don't.
I don't anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Which is weird.
Oh,
Very weird.
Yeah.
The youngsters in America with no cars.
Exactly.
That's the
it's
reason
city
why.
dwellers. The city dwellers.
Yeah.
City
Parking
dwellers,
here.
yes. That's
hard
what it is.
and expensive. All right, Tom, thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
It's being called a Wright brothers moment, the first controlled flight by an aircraft on another planet. NASA's 4-foot-wide Ingenuity helicopter has now successfully flown 3 times in Mars' rarefied atmosphere. One woman has been working towards this for a long time. That's inspirational lead engineer Mimi Ong. I spoke to her about the history she's making and why no one should call her creation a drone.
There's been a lot of out-of-this-world news the past few weeks.
We have done it. Huge milestone. Definitely, for human beings, a historical moment.
And one woman has had a front seat in mission control for it all.
We can now say that human beings have flown a rotorcraft on another planet.
That's Mimi Ong. She's a NASA engineer and currently the project manager for the Mars Ingenuity, the mini helicopter that's been charming all of us Earthlings.
You sound so stoked about space, which makes me so stoked about space. And I just love that infectious excitement that you have for what you do.
We're on Earth and we're human beings here, but is there life out there? Are we alone? So for me, that's always been the burning question. Different people have different, wherever they get the rush, like you're talking about, and for me, because I really like to push a state of the art forward, to advance the field.
And that she most certainly has. Just this weekend, her little helicopter that could achieved its fastest and furthest flight yet, streaming loads of data and imagery down to the Jet Propulsion Lab, or JPL, in Pasadena, California.
I got quite emotional the other day. I actually started crying. I got this sense of our little 4-pound Ingenuity just having a time of its life, and it was hovering the way we have been designing it to and testing, and it was just like up, hovering, coming down, landing, and I'm like, it doesn't miss us at all.
Mimi's been excited about space for a long time. She joined the JPL in 1990 and has worked in projects related to spaceflight and the NASA Deep Space Network ever since, a career she's fought hard for.
Does it hit you how many young women, how many young diverse women you could be inspiring?
To be honest, I'm learning that. I don't want other kids, the next generation, to take as long as I did to realize that, it's okay. There is no such thing as you're not good enough.
A young girl might look at you and say, I look like that. And seeing her say that means I can do it. So now I believe right now.
Well, that would make me so happy. It wasn't obvious to me that I had a path to space exploration. While I was fascinated with space, right? Like, what's out there? Is there life out there? Are we alone? I mean, that's something I didn't think I would ever get an opportunity to, be a part of it. I received a lot of those comments, right? Why do you want to study that? Wouldn't you rather go into something that's more, amenable for girls at the time, right?
Lucky for Mimi, she had a woman in her own home who set exactly the right example for girls. Her mother got her PhD in math in the 1960s, the first woman from Myanmar to get her PhD from an American university.
Did it strike you growing up, like how cool your mom was as a woman to be in that field, especially since today we're still talking about this deficit of women in STEM fields?
It didn't really hit me until now, and especially after now that she's gone.
For Ong, Mars is just the beginning. When it comes to her future goals, think infinity and beyond.
Give me one that might blow my mind.
A fully autonomous spacecraft, okay, that you just launch and you just say, launch and go find water on another planet. Just on your own, go explore, and then you just write back to us how it's going.
All right. Yep, my mind blown. Mimi, I just thought of one other teeny tiny question, just because we giggle about it sometimes. Is there a reason that it is specifically a mini helicopter and not a drone?
There is no technical difference. It's a helicopter or a drone. I was hung up on this one, and here's the reason. A drone, you go to a store or you order online, and you unpack it and you read the instructions and you fly it outside. And Mars helicopter was absolutely not that.
It most definitely isn't. So, helicopter it is.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.